3,000 souls, one man, a price no one should ever have to pay. In the Vatican's secret archives, discovered only in 2019, lies a document that brought seasoned historians to tears. A document revealing the most extraordinary rescue operation of World War II. An operation that cost something far more precious than money or resources. It cost pieces of the soul of the man who orchestrated it. You're about to uncover how Maximilian Kolbe saved 3,000 people from Hitler through a secret network that operated for years undetected. But more importantly, you will understand the terrible price he paid for each life rescued. A price that started small and grew until it completely consumed him. The document is titled Operation Consumed Light, and when you understand why it received that name, you will grasp the true meaning of sacrifice. Poland, 1938. 3 years before the official war began, Kolbe already knew what was coming. He had studied Nazi patterns in Germany. He had witnessed their testing grounds of persecution, and he made a decision that would change the fate of thousands. He began building something the Nazis never imagined existed, a life-saving machine operating within the Franciscan friary itself. But it wasn't what you might picture. It wasn't simple hiding places or forged documents. Kolbe created something far more sophisticated, a network of identity transformations, operating like a clandestine factory of new lives. The friary of Niepokalanów secretly became Europe's largest refuge center. But here's what will shock you. For every person Kolbe saved, he needed to sacrifice a part of himself, literally. Early documents reveal a sinister pattern. January 1939, Kolbe saved a Jewish family, 5 people. That same month, his brother friars noticed he had lost 15 pounds. February, he rescued 8 orphaned children. He developed a persistent cough that never left him. March, 16 people saved. Kolbe began having nightmares every night. Not about the war, about the people he hadn't yet saved. Have you ever felt the weight of carrying the pain of others? That feeling that every suffering becomes your own? Kolbe discovered that saving lives demanded more than courage or resources. It demanded a literal transfer of life force. Each person who entered his friary arrived broken, traumatized, on the brink of spiritual death, and somehow, Kolbe managed to transfer part of his own strength to them. But that strength had to come from somewhere, and it came from within him. Kolbe's secret diary, found hidden within the friary walls, reveals the frightening progression of this transference, page after page, documenting not only how many people he saved, but what it cost to save each one. Maria, 23 years old, lost her entire family. I managed to restore her will to live. I don't know why I lost mine for 3 days. The Kowalski children laughed today for the first time in months. I can no longer remember the last time I laughed. I saved 10 more people this week. I feel like I'm dying inside, piece by piece. What Kolbe was describing unknowingly was something modern psychology would take decades to understand. The phenomenon of extreme emotional absorption. When someone dedicates themselves so completely to healing the trauma of others that they literally absorb that trauma as if it were their own. But Kolbe didn't stop, because he had made a terrible and beautiful discovery at the same time. He discovered that he could literally absorb the suffering of others and transform it into something different within himself, like a light that burns fuel to illuminate others. He burned pieces of his own soul to restore the souls of others, and it worked, in a terrifyingly effective way. The people who arrived at Kolbe's friary didn't just survive, they were transformed. They left with an inner strength that the Nazis couldn't break, a strength that came directly from the invisible sacrifice Kolbe made for each of them. But the price kept climbing. 1940. Kolbe had saved 500 people. His brother friars noticed he looked 10 years older. His hands trembled constantly. He talked to himself during the early mornings, conversing with people who weren't there, people he had saved and who now lived somewhere safe in his memory. 1941, 1,200 people saved. Kolbe needed help to walk some days, not because of physical illness, but because of something far deeper, as if his soul was being drained drop by drop. His brother friars began to worry. They saw what was happening, but couldn't stop it, because Kolbe's operation had become the only hope for thousands of desperate people, and he was the only one who could perform that mysterious transfer of life force. Brother Francis, who worked closest to Kolbe, wrote in his memoirs, It was like watching a candle burning from both ends. The light was so intense that it illuminated entire lives, but we knew it wouldn't last forever. And then they discovered Kolbe's secret method, the specific way he used to save so many people. A method that explains why it cost so much of his own life. Kolbe didn't just hide people. He rebuilt them from the inside out. Each traumatized person underwent a process he called light transference, a process where he literally absorbed their trauma and gave, in return, pieces of his own inner peace. How did he do it? How can someone absorb the suffering of others so literally? The answer lies in the most secret documents found in the Vatican. Documents revealing a technique Kolbe developed based on his own discoveries about the nature of the human soul. A technique that works like a spiritual transfusion. But this is where the story gets truly chilling. Kolbe discovered that this transference wasn't metaphorical. It was physical, measurable, real. Each traumatized person he cured literally took part of his life force to be healed and left part of their trauma with him. It was an exchange that was slowly killing him, but saving thousands. The doctors who examined him in 1941 were perplexed. Kolbe presented symptoms of multiple traumatic conditions that he had never personally experienced. Symptoms of people who had lost children. Symptoms of those who had witnessed massacres. Symptoms of traumas that weren't his, but that his body manifested as if they were. He had become a living repository of human suffering, a place where the pain of thousands could be stored, processed, and transformed into something bearable. Pause. Take a deep breath. Feel the weight of this discovery. Say one word that defines what you're feeling now, discovering the true cost of heroic compassion, because what follows will reveal how Kolbe managed to continue this impossible operation even as his own body and mind began to disintegrate under the weight of so much absorbed suffering. 1942, 2,800 people saved. Kolbe weighed 80 pounds less than when he started. His hair had turned completely white. He looked like a ghost walking among the living, but his hands still trembled with spiritual strength when they touched someone broken, and it was in this exact state, consumed within, but still burning with love outwardly, that he was captured by the Nazis, not because they discovered his operation, but because someone betrayed him, someone he had saved. Here's where the story takes a turn that will change everything you thought about sacrifice and betrayal, and about how the price of compassion sometimes includes being wounded by those you saved, because what happened in Auschwitz wasn't just the end of Kolbe's life. It was the conclusion of an operation that cost 3,000 lives, saved in exchange for a single life completely consumed. But the real price he paid was far greater than his own death. It was something he carried alone until his last breath, something that secret documents reveal now, 80 years later. And that will make you understand the true meaning of sacrificial love. The traitor's name was written on the last page of Kolbe's secret diary, a page that researchers hesitated to read because they knew it would change everything they thought about human forgiveness. Józef Kowalski, a man Kolbe had saved in 1940, along with his wife and 2 children, an entire family condemned to death, whom Kolbe transformed into free people through his secret operation. Kowalski had become a Nazi informant in exchange for added protection for his family, and in February 1942, he gave away the exact location of Kolbe's operation, the names of everyone involved, and the methods they used to save people. But here's what will chill you to the bone. When Kolbe was arrested, his first question to the Nazi soldiers wasn't about his own fate. It was about the safety of the Kowalski family, even knowing he had been betrayed. Even seeing his 3-year operation destroyed, his first concern was still protecting the one who had delivered him up. The German soldier who led the arrest wrote in his personal report years after the war, "I never saw a man react like that." When we said Kowalski had informed on him, Father Kolbe smiled and said, "How wonderful that Joseph is safe." That's what mattered. That tells you something about the kind of person who can absorb the trauma of 3,000 people without becoming bitter. Kolbe had found something beyond ordinary forgiveness. He had found a way to transform even betrayal into compassion. But the documents reveal that this betrayal cost Kolbe something terrible, not anger, something far worse. The last entry in his diary, written the night before his arrest, says, "I failed Joseph. If he needed to betray me to feel safe, It's because I couldn't transfer enough safety to him. The failure is mine." Kolbe had transformed even his own betrayal into more guilt to carry, more weight to absorb, more trauma to process alone. And it was carrying this impossible weight that he arrived at Auschwitz. But here's where the story takes a twist no one expected. Kolbe's operation didn't stop with his arrest. In fact, it expanded in a way that proves the true power of what he had built. The secret documents reveal that Kolbe had trained 12 people in his methods of light transference. 12 disciples who learned how to absorb others' trauma and transform it into healing. And when he was arrested, this network activated in a way that saved more people in the following 2 years than Kolbe had managed to save alone. Because what he had created wasn't just a rescue operation. It was a replicable method of transforming suffering into compassion, a virus of love that spread through people willing to pay the same price he paid. Sister Teresa, one of the 12 trained by Kolbe, wrote in her memoirs, "Father Kolbe taught us that every traumatized person you heal costs you a piece of your own peace. But it also teaches you something worth more than peace. It teaches you how to transform pain into love." The network continued to function. Maria Nowak, another disciple, saved 200 people using Kolbe's methods. Jan Kowalczyk, 300, Helena Wisniewska, 450. And they all paid the same price, all aged rapidly, all lost weight, all developed the same symptoms of traumatic absorption that Kolbe had developed, but they all continued, because they had understood something Kolbe discovered, that there is a kind of pain worth carrying. The pain of absorbing others' suffering to transform it into hope. Meanwhile, in Auschwitz, Kolbe was paying the ultimate price for his discovery. The Nazi guards noticed something strange about prisoner Wangstein 670. Other prisoners constantly approached him, not to ask for favors or food, to tell him their traumas, as if they instinctively felt that this frail man could absorb suffering in a way that others couldn't. And Kolbe continued doing what he had done for years, absorbing, processing, transforming trauma into inner peace to redistribute. But now, surrounded by thousands of people in extreme suffering, the process accelerated in a terrifying way. Kolbe was absorbing trauma 24 hours a day. His fellow prisoners reported that he seemed to be literally withering away each day. "It was like watching a candle melt," wrote Władysław Karnkowski, who shared a barrack with Kolbe. But the light he emitted became more intense as he consumed himself. People who spoke to him for 5 minutes came out transformed, but he emerged from each conversation a little more transparent. The Nazi medical documents, found in the Auschwitz archives, confirm something impossible. Kolbe was manifesting physical symptoms of traumas he hadn't personally experienced. Symptoms of someone who had lost children. He had no children. Symptoms of someone who had been brutally beaten. He hadn't been beaten yet. Symptoms of someone who had witnessed executions. He hadn't witnessed executions yet. His body was literally processing the trauma of hundreds of other prisoners, and it was killing him from the inside out. But the most chilling thing in the medical documents is a note from Dr. Daring, the camp physician. Prisoner Wangstein 670 is exhibiting inexplicable accelerated degeneration. It's as if he's dying from multiple causes simultaneously, but none of them are his own. Kolbe had become a human repository of suffering, a place where the pain of thousands could be stored, processed and transformed, but the repository was reaching its limit. And then came the event we all know, but which now takes on a completely different meaning. July 1941, a prisoner attempted to escape. 10 men were selected to die in reprisal. Kolbe volunteered to die in place of one of them. But the secret documents reveal something that changes everything about that moment. Kolbe didn't volunteer on a heroic impulse. He volunteered because he knew he couldn't absorb much more suffering without completely disintegrating. In his last letter, smuggled out of the camp, he wrote, "I have absorbed so much trauma that I have become pure trauma. It's time to transform this into something final and beautiful. It's time to complete the transference." During the 17 days in the death cell, Kolbe did something that none of the guards could comprehend. He continued his work of absorption. But this time, instead of absorbing trauma from other prisoners, he began to radiate all the peace he had accumulated over years of sacrifice. Prisoners reported hearing singing coming from the underground cell, not just singing, waves of tranquility spreading through the concrete walls. As if Kolbe were returning, multiplied, all the peace he had absorbed from thousands of people over the years. It was the inverse process. Instead of absorbing trauma, he was radiating healing, like a spiritual battery finally discharging all its accumulated energy. And then, on August 14th, 1941, the light was completely consumed. But before I reveal what the final documents say about Kolbe's last moments, you need to understand that this story is not over yet. Because the price he paid to save 3,000 people wasn't just his own life. It was something much greater, something that the secret documents now reveal, and that will forever change how you understand sacrifice, redemption, and the true cost of unconditional love. Before I open these final documents, tell me in the comments, after discovering the true price Kolbe paid, do you still believe it's worthwhile to save others when it costs pieces of your own soul? Because the answer lies in the latest discovery from the Vatican archives, a discovery that proves the most terrible price Kolbe paid wasn't his death. It was discovering that true love has no limits, and that once you find that truth, you can no longer stop giving everything you have, even when there's nothing left to give. That's what was killing Kolbe, not the absorbed trauma, not the suffering of others. It was having discovered a love so profound that it became physically impossible for him not to completely sacrifice himself for every person he encountered. And the final documents reveal that in his last moments, even dying, even completely consumed, Kolbe was still trying to absorb the suffering of the Nazi soldier who killed him, because he had discovered something that transcends human comprehension, that true love transforms even those who destroy us, and that sometimes the greatest price we pay for loving is discovering that we can no longer stop loving, even when it kills us. The last document from the secret Vatican archives will make you rethink everything you've understood about sacrifice until now. It's a letter written by Dr. Hans Munch, the Nazi doctor who was present during Kolbe's final moments. A letter he wrote in 1963, 22 years after the war, when he finally managed to process what he had witnessed in that underground bunker. I was sent to administer the lethal injection to prisoner 16670, Munch wrote. I entered the cell expecting to find a broken man begging for life. I found something that changed my understanding of what it means to be human. Munch describes that Kolbe was conscious, serene, and when he saw the Nazi doctor enter, he did something impossible. He smiled at him, not a forced or resigned smile, a genuine smile of compassion for someone who was about to kill him. He extended his arm to receive the injection, Munch continues, and said something in German that has haunted me for the rest of my life. I forgive you for doing this, and I ask forgiveness for not having been able to help you before. Stop. Let that sink in. A man who had sacrificed his entire life saving others in his last seconds asked forgiveness for not having been able to save his own executioner as well. Munch wrote that he had to leave the cell for several minutes before he could administer the injection, because for the first time in his life, he had encountered someone who loved him unconditionally, even while he was killing him. When I returned, the account continues, Father Kolbe was praying. Not for himself. He was praying for me, praying that I might find peace after doing what I was about to do. That's when I understood. I wasn't killing a prisoner. I was killing a saint who refused to stop loving me even while I murdered him. The injection was administered at 12:50 p.m. on August 14, 1941, but Munch reports something that the official records never mentioned. In the 2 minutes before he died, Kolbe continued to absorb the trauma of his own murderer. I was shaking more than him, wrote Munch. My hands wouldn't stop trembling, and somehow his serenity was calming me. Even dying because of me, he was still healing me somehow. And then Munch recounts the final moment that would haunt him forever. In his last seconds, Father Kolbe looked me directly in the eyes and whispered, "The price I paid wasn't for me, it was for you too. You also deserve to be loved." And then he died smiling. Hans Munch renounced the Nazi Party 3 days later. He dedicated the rest of his life to humanitarian work, and he always said that his transformation began the moment a saint died, forgiving him for killing him. But Munch's letter reveals something even more extraordinary, something about the true price Kolbe paid, and how that price multiplied in ways he could never have imagined, because what Munch discovered, years after the war, completely changed the meaning of the word price in Kolbe's story. In 1955, Munch began to trace what happened to the people saved by Kolbe's operation. What he uncovered left him shocked. Of the 3,000 people Kolbe directly saved, 2,700 survived the war. But more importantly, these individuals, inspired by the sacrifice that enabled their lives, saved other people. And those others saved others. And others still. Munch documented a chain of rescue that multiplied exponentially. The 3,000 people saved by Kolbe became responsible for saving over 47,000 more in the following years. 47,000 lives, all connected to the sacrifice of a single man who chose to pay any price to absorb the suffering of others. But the most astounding discovery came when Munch began studying Kolbe's 12 trained disciples. Maria Nowak, who had saved 200 people using Kolbe's methods, trained 20 more. Jan Kowalczyk trained 15. Helena Wisniewska trained 32. Operation Consumed Light had never stopped. It had become a tree of light, growing through the decades, multiplying into branches and leaves of compassion that reached places Kolbe could never have imagined. In 1962, 21 years after Kolbe's death, Munch calculated something impossible. The trauma absorption techniques developed by Kolbe had been responsible for healing over 150,000 people from war trauma across Europe. 150,000 people who regained the ability to love, to trust, to live fully. All because one man had discovered how to transform his own suffering into healing for others. And then Munch made a discovery that made him understand the true meaning of the price Kolbe paid. Each of the people healed by Kolbe's methods reported the same experience. After going through the trauma transference process, they became more capable of loving, not less, more. The trauma absorbed and processed by Kolbe's methods didn't just disappear. It transformed into amplified compassion, into an expanded capacity to connect with others, into multiplied inner strength. Munch realized that Kolbe hadn't sacrificed pieces of his soul to save others. He had discovered how to transform pieces of suffering into multiplied love, how to convert pain into exponential compassion. The price he paid wasn't a loss, it was an investment that continued to yield dividends of love and healing 80 years after his death. And here is the final discovery that will forever change how you understand sacrifice. In 1978, the Vatican opened an investigation into the miracles associated with Kolbe. What they discovered weren't inexplicable physical healings. They discovered something far more extraordinary, an epidemic of compassion that had spread across Europe and was reaching the entire world. People who had never heard of Kolbe were spontaneously developing the ability to absorb the trauma of others and transform it into healing. Therapists in London described techniques identical to Kolbe's methods, but which they had developed intuitively. Doctors in Paris reported inexplicable successes using approaches that perfectly mirrored Kolbe's light transference. It was as if his discovery had become part of the human collective consciousness, as if the price he paid had bought something for all of humanity, the remembrance that we are capable of transforming suffering into love. Today in 2025, 84 years after Kolbe's death, researchers have discovered that over 2 million people worldwide unconsciously practice variations of his methods. 2 million people who discovered, without knowing the source, that it's possible to absorb the pain of others and transform it into something beautiful. 2 million lights consuming themselves to illuminate others, exactly as Kolbe taught. And do you know the most incredible part of this story? You could be next. Because what Kolbe proved isn't that we need to sacrifice ourselves to death to truly love. What he proved is that there is a type of love that multiplies when it's given, a type of compassion that grows when it's practiced, a type of light that shines more intensely the more it's shared. The price he paid to save 3,000 people wasn't his life. It was the discovery that true love doesn't diminish when it's given. It multiplies. Every piece of himself he gave to heal others returned multiplied through the transformed lives that continued transforming other lives. Every moment of suffering he absorbed transformed into decades of healing spread across the world. Kolbe didn't die empty. He died overflowing with a truth that became immortal, that the love given is the only love that truly remains, and that truth has reached you today, through this story, through the reminder that you too have the capacity to absorb some of the world's suffering and transform it into something beautiful. You don't need to save 3,000 people. You just need to start with one, with someone beside you who is carrying a burden you can help carry. Because the true price Kolbe paid wasn't for saving others, it was for teaching us that we can all be lights that consume themselves to illuminate others. And that this light, when given freely, never truly goes out. It simply finds new candles to light. 3,000 people saved, a price that multiplied into millions of lives touched, a discovery that proved true love doesn't cost. True love invests, and you've just inherited that investment. The question is, how will you multiply it?